right, so it's Todd Atkins and Derek Galanis is back. For those of you that watch my show, you've seen Derek probably plenty of times at this point. And so he's back to, we're going to discuss this UFC 290. The show was so good. I think I don't always jump on to talk about UFC shows post event, but I think this one was good enough that you kind of have to. And it kind of left me wanting to. So, yeah, we're going to talk about that. And before we start, I have a sponsor, Live to Fight Design. You can see right above me. You can find them at Instagram at Live to Fight Design. They make banners for gyms. Derek, maybe you could get one for your gym.
That'd be awesome.
And also for fighters. And if you use my promo code above me, which is Todd Atkins, you can get $20 off your order. Now, we're gonna jump into 290. I think I'll just go from the start of it. Do you want to go from the bottom or the top?
Yeah, let's go. Let's go from Bo Nickel.
Yeah, I think all the fights have a good story. So let's kind of talk about Bo Nickel. Then I'm going to let you kind of start with Bo Nickel versus Val Woodburn.
Yeah, I mean, the last time I saw Bo Nickel, and he's only had 2 fights in the UFC, right? So I've seen them both. I didn't see his contender series fights, but I remember in his first fight, he came out and he threw a head kick and he fell down. And it reminded me of Ken Shamrock against Rich Franklin.
Yeah.
If you remember, which was the final for UFC Tough One, right? And it just shows where his level is right now in striking. When I saw the guy they matched him with, I said, well, this has got to be a setup, but I figured maybe he'd test him a little. Well, you didn't really test him at all, right? Clearly right now, they're in the process of protecting Nickel while he learns to fight, while he learns to stand up, that is. That having been said, let's hope wherever he is, and I always say ATT, so I think he is. So I think they're going to do a lot better job than the Scrap Pack's doing with Kron.
Yeah, I think he goes down, he does some training with ATT, but he also has his own ATT affiliate there in Penn State. So it's like a lot of Penn State wrestlers, they're all trained together. And it's called ATT Happy Valley or whatever, right over there where Penn State University is. So they got a lot of badass wrestlers from Penn State there, like tons of them. So they probably put out some other guys too.
So it has always been there, right? And look, I remember going to a UFC events in Vegas, and we're talking now like 8 years ago, maybe 9. I don't know. I was away for a while, but yeah, AT&T comes in force to those events. They're fans, they're hangers on, they're everything. So yeah, they're a real team. They've got real coaches. It's not like a bunch of high school kids hanging around. So it's a place where you can really refine your martial arts.
Yeah. And I always tell people the first time I saw Bo Nickel, I went to a wrestling duel, Oklahoma State versus Penn State. So this was a pretty large duel. It was sold out, and this is at Gallagher Arena in Stillwater. And Nickel was a freshman, so Oklahoma State won the first 3 matches, and then he came in and he pinned his opponent about 38 seconds, I think it was, and they won all the matches after that. So it kind of just took the air out of the arena a little bit. So I remember seeing him then when he's a freshman at Penn State.
Amazing.
Yeah. And his family and him, they were all in front of me because I had real good seats. I was basically right near the front. And yeah, so I had seen him even back then.
That's cool, man. I mean, look, obviously, I heard he was a 4-year, right, All-American. Won the national title 3 years, but 4-year All-American. So probably during that year, he was an All-American.
Yeah. 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 He's an amazing story. I mean, I think he's going to keep, moving up just because of his wrestling ability. He really didn't try to use it too much in this fight. He kind of did one little feint wrestling, but I don't think he really tried to use it all that much. So it'll be interesting to see. He can always go to that no matter who he fights. That's one of the huge advantages he has, just like the Dagestanis. They can fall back on that if they need to at any time.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, look, there are holes there. Remember when Mark Coleman brought in all the guys from his school, right? But he didn't really go over MMA with them, right? And they gave up their backs, they got choked out and whatnot. No, I'm not saying that's going to happen in nickel, but what I do know is it can be really difficult when you're an absolute ace in one art to learn the other arts as a beginner. And as a striker, I'm sure he's beginner level, or intermediate level, right? I mean, it's just logical to assume that. But in the UFC, you can, as long as your grappling's real good, look, it's why Brandon lost last night. I mean, he outfought the guy on his feet, but he couldn't stop that takedown.
But Nickel did show power, knockout power, which is not everyone has.
No doubt. I mean, Todd, I'm so suspicious of the fight game, man. I mean, you know what I wrote in my book about it, and my suspicion is that guy was a late replacement. They weren't bringing anyone in that could actually handle Nickel. I know he's undefeated, but you know what? There's a million undefeated guys on local circuits, so that doesn't really mean anything anyway. The guy was about 5'8", right, 185 pounds, which is extra short for that division. So yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking about is the he kind of caught him with this lead right hand from a left-handed stance, and I think I was telling people most wrestlers, Nickel's probably right-handed. Wrestlers learn to wrestle with their strong foot forward. So Kid Yamamoto, who I trained with in Japan, he always caught guys with that lead right. He threw it as a knockout punch, not as a jab. His jab was a power shot, and his lead right hook was a power shot. So I think those are things that are going to be good for Nickel because guys aren't used to seeing that punch come from that angle with
Yeah,
power.
I had a training partner named Russ Edwards, and Russ was a wrestler, jujitsu black belt first, and he always fought southpaw, even though he's exactly what you're talking about. And what he told me was, because of their insecurity with stand up, it makes them feel like, well, I can snatch a single leg anytime I want. And they're used to fighting from that side anyway, like you said, power foot forward. So, I mean, that's good. I mean, yeah, it's especially in MMA where either hand can be the knockout punch. It's much more of a factor, like you're saying. I know De La Hoya was a converted, he converted himself also. Like, I think his power hand was his lead hand and he trained himself. But boxing's different things. The gloves, the lack of kicks, lack of takedowns. But yeah, I know what you're saying.
Now we'll get to Hooker and Jalen Turner. I mean, that was a great fight. Going in, I think a lot of people thought maybe Dan Hooker, if he lost his fight, he might be finished. But it turned out to be a great fight. Let's talk about this one.
Yeah, man. I mean, well, look, the problem for poor Hooker is they know how good he is, and they've been using him against absolute killers, right? I think he lost to Chandler, and after Chandler won that, Chandler got the title fight, and then he lost to another killer. I can't remember who. So Hooker's just been in like a buzzsaw of really good guys. Now with Jalen Turner, I mean, what I see is natural raw talent, like at an unbelievable level. But Hooker probably has more big time experience at this point than Jalen did, and I think it really showed. I think he outgutted him, and what a fight from both men. I mean, wow.
Yeah, Hooker took some big shots early, and then he started to find his way and start to land some of his own. Turner looked close to finish a couple of times. Hooker probably would have finished him had the round not ended when he had that choke in, because Turner looked like he was done there. But yeah, I think it was an impressive fight for Hooker. And kind of now he might be able to, come back if they kind of give him the right matches. Rebuild himself up a little bit.
Yeah, and let's hope they do, right? Because they've been sort of setting him up against the premier guys, and so he's become this opponent, and it's not really fair to him. I mean, Jalen Turner is so naturally gifted, height and everything else. But yeah, Hooker, like I said, I think his competition served him well last night, and that's why he was able to take Jalen out, or he didn't take him out as a decision, but you know what I mean.
And he had that great fight with Poirier. I mean, and you see where Poirier is now. Hooker had an absolute war with Poirier. So it kind of
Yeah,
shows that he can hang there.
it's another example. Just one more, man. I mean, they put him against premier guys, and the reality is he fights all of them tough. and he's a premier guy himself. And look, it is all the matching now. If they want to, recreate him, they can. If they don't want to, they won't. And I guess it's up to Dana and Hunter.
Now, this, the last three fights all had something as far as going into them, but this one, especially Whitaker and Duplessis, you got kind of Whitaker, who everyone likes, Whitaker, who everyone thinks no one else can beat other than Adesanya. And then you had Duplessis, who's kind of into the news cycle now because of what's going on with him in Israel. So, yeah, I mean, it turned out to surprise a lot of people. What did you think of it?
Well, so I remember I'm sitting with my friends from church who don't know anything. Most of them, some of them do, but he asked me, "So, what do you think about this fight?" I said, "Well, listen, man, I haven't seen Duplessis yet, and last night I saw him, right, and I realize who he is now. And look, it's funny, So fighting has all these rules and things you need to do and everything else. But then there's a guy whose physicality breaks all those rules and it really doesn't apply to him anymore. And those are guys that are hard to teach to fight, right? Because they're like, well, I can go through this guy. What do I care? And that's who Duplessis is. I mean, Whitaker is about as technically sound an MMA Muay Thai striker as can be. Now, he fought kind of with his hands down, which surprised me a little bit last night, but I think he was trying to be elusive, or maybe he was scared of the takedown. I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, man, he went through one of the most durable guys we've seen at that weight class in a long time. I mean, what a statement by that guy. He is a real threat. Now, so here's the question, though. Whitaker has great Muay Thai for MMA. Adesanya is a kickboxer, legit, just like Pereira is. So the question is, can Duplessis do that same thing to Adesanya? I think he can, but we're going to see, right?
Yeah, I really think the beginning of the end was when, Whitaker locked up with him and Duplessis threw him from the headlock, like a hip throw. And you could see at the end of the round, he proceeded to beat up Whitaker real bad on the bottom, which is where I think he could do some damage to Adesanya as well. But you could see Whitaker's eyes were really big when he was in the corner, and I was like, he was in shock. I think he thought, he was complimentary of Duplessis and all, or Duplessis, but I don't think he thought Duplessis could beat him. And when he went back to the corner, he was shocked at what had happened to him. And you know how that is. You're in the gym with someone that you think you can handle, and that person starts handling you. Or maybe it's somebody you used to handle pretty easily, and now you're not anymore. And it's kind of surprising. I think he was shocked.
Yeah, I've been there. And look, as a fighter, you got to believe, right, that you're unbeatable. You're going to walk through your opponent. It's necessary for the mental edge. So I don't blame him for that. I think he was shocked at what he walked into. I mean, certainly Whitaker is the highest level opponent Duplessis ever had. So I think Whitaker was thinking, well, yeah, all that nonsense stops here. I mean, being frank with you, Todd, like one of the rules, like you never do a head throw, right? You never do a head throw. It's bad for jiu-jitsu. They get the back. Then a guy like Duplessis comes in and goes, I can do whatever I want, and he does it. It's just pretty amazing, man. A physical specimen. To see it, I mean, in women's MMA, that was Shevchenko, and so Grasso finally got her out of there. But in men's MMA this day and age, to see a guy like that's a super freak.
Yeah, he looks kind of like a bodybuilder, and he moves awkwardly. But if he hits you, he's going to do damage, and if you grab him, he's stronger than you are.
Yeah, it's almost like old school UFC, like
Yeah.
coming back. Like you don't expect trained fighters these days to be manhandled like that by a wrecking ball. But the guy looks like he has cannonballs for shoulders, man. I
Yeah.
mean, wow. He's going to be the first world champ from South Africa.
Yeah, I think that. What did you think about the after fight? I think the build-up's going to be, it could be one of the ugliest build-ups in the history of UFC. I think it could get pretty bad depending on where these two guys want to take it.
Yeah, I mean, look. So I know Adesanya loved professional wrestling, right? And we saw that with his Undertaker walkout last time, and I really liked that. What I don't like is trying to talk trash. If it doesn't come naturally, you Todd, it's one of the reasons I don't really do it. It's not that I don't make snide comments and stuff, but I'm not going to get up and talk trash because I know it'll come off as phony or because it's not me. And I don't think it's Adesanya either. I think he's trying to make a show of it, and he's just really making himself look like an idiot.
Yeah, and I think Duplessis is kind of he's a what's the word I could use? He's good at that, whatever you want to call it. I wanted to say something else as far as to describe it, like subtly good at it, maybe. Not where he's trying, but he's funny. He can, even his response, you may be from Africa, but I'm no brother of yours, those kind of things. He can say those kind of things just off the top of his head and I think if Adesanya tries to get into that he's already under Adesanya's skin, you can tell that. He's
Oh
yeah,
yeah. Oh yeah. I
yeah.
mean that explains part of the behavior.
Mhm.
Yeah, look, we'll see what happens in the ring. It's gonna be soon, I imagine, right?
Yeah, I mean, because like you knew about the what he had said to get Adesanya all spun up like that, right? When he was basically alluding to the fact that Usman, Ngannou, and Adesanya all left Africa, at various ages to
Ah,
go be successful. So he was saying this was at an earlier event where he was saying, I still live in Africa. I've always been here. These guys aren't Africans. I am. If there's going to be an African champion, it'll be me. These guys are champion, but they're not African champions. They live somewhere else.
yeah, and I think I've heard Adesanya trying to throw the like, you're not African, kind of you're white. But listen, man, the Boers and the English have been in South Africa for hundreds of years at this point, right? That is who they are. That's how they identify themselves. I mean, we as Americans, we've only been here 500 years. So that is what it is. At the end of the day, the way I see that is Duplessis right. Like, hey man, you're from New Zealand, you're from Australia. Don't try to claim Africa now. You're gone. But in fairness, like South Africa is far more developed than Nigeria is, than Cameroon is, where Ngannou came from. So I understand why they left.
Yeah. Now, let's get into Moreno Pantoja. I have a lot of interest in this because, you know, when I was in Dallas, Moreno was fought on that card. I think he was the co-main event, just like this time, and so did Pantoja. He had a real short fight. Um, one thing I wanted to allude to before we talk about it that not a lot of people are talking about. He was with James Krause when he fought in Dallas. He was with James Krause. He fought a Kai Kara France. He's a pretty good fighter too, and he looked really good. He won the fight handily, stopped Kara France maybe in the second, third round. And one thing I wanted to ask you before we talk about is now he has some different corners. He's got this, I think, a guy from Dallas, maybe Fortis MMA, and then he's got the Mexican guy. He's got like two guys yelling at him in the corner, in different languages. Do you think it could have been different with James Krause had this not all happened?
Well, so let me say this, Todd. So I remember I was fighting for a guy. It was the guy I started my kickboxing career with. And, I was young. I was in 25 or something. And it was very clear that the guy was acting bizarrely with me. And so I had to leave. And he kind of ushered me out. And my next fight was with a gym called Black Tiger in San Diego. And the guy there was horrible. Chris Getz, just, I mean, egos in the fight game, especially back then, were really bad. And all I can tell you is that switching gyms totally destroyed me as a fighter. All my, who I was, who I defined myself as, it got ruined by that switch. Now, look, today's a whole different level, right? He's not switching to a Black Tiger. He's switching to, an actual good fight gym. But can that have a mental effect on you? You bet it can, man. You're used to, James Krause's wizard being there telling you what to do, and he's not there anymore. It can have an effect. Now, all that having been said, Todd, I do want to say this. I thought Moreno fought a heck of a fight.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think his boxing looked really good. And Pantoja was just, tough and keep coming and then get his takedowns. That's the one area where I think Moreno showed some regression because he is a wrestler. He wrestled in Mexico. and he's always had strong wrestling, but Pantoja was just taking him down a lot. So I think that's one area where maybe he showed a step back, but his boxing looked really good. Yeah, I agree. It was a great fight.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you honestly, being that Moreno was the champion, I wouldn't have minded if the split decision went the other way, based on the fact that, Moreno did a lot of work on the feet. Pantoja looked like he was out, and give it to him, he's tough, right? Like, as he looked like he was out, he didn't go anywhere. And, he sort of laid and prayed him, for lack of a better word. I know it was different positions. He wasn't always on top, but he was essentially wrestling Brandon down and not letting him go. And I don't know how I feel about that. I feel the striking was much more effective. Now, do I think it was a robbery? No way. Look, I get why judges would see Pantoja as the winner. I thought it was a really sad way for Brandon to go out. I mean, to me, he's a big thing too, because I made a decision years ago in prison. I'm going to learn Spanish and I'm going to go to TJ. I'm going to become an MMA trainer down there because I knew they were going to be great champions coming from there. And then lo and behold, there were three. What, yesterday? Now there's one. But the bottom line is, when he won the title, it was very emotional for me. It didn't matter that it wasn't me doing it; it was that my vision was being completed. And him losing it hurt me in a way. Now, that having been said, listen, you saw Pantoja's family, you saw those kids, you saw his wife. The guy just changed his life, man. And you can't help but be happy for him as well. He's just a really bad matchup for Brandon Moreno, and I don't know that Krause in the corner would have made any difference with that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you something. See, you just mentioned that. I'm trying to find this right quick. The September card, I think is it September? I know they were going to do kind of like the Mexican Independence Day card or whatever. Do you remember that? Yeah, here it is. It's going to be Grasa Shevchenko's headlining the card, but having like Moreno lose, having Yair lose, Yasmin lose, they probably would have wanted to use one or two of those fighters on that card.
Guaranteed, man. But the game is at such a high level now. But listen, there'll be other Mexicans. Not that Moreno and Rodriguez aren't absolute killers, but there'll be more. Don't worry, they're coming, man.
Yeah. Now let's kind of get into Rodriguez and Volkanovski. I thought it was a very interesting fight, for different reasons in the main event, because you kind of had how's Volkanovski going to deal with, this different kind of puzzle, so to speak. Guy who's taller, does a lot of crazy stuff. Volkanovski likes to fight standing up most of the time. But he changed his tactics in this fight with the wrestling a lot. And then really, I thought Yair was coming on in the third when Volkanovski caught him. He was starting to find his rhythm.
So Todd, right? So I said, I go, well, Yair won this round. And then right after, it was like a half second later, Volk took him down and stopped him. And everybody in the room looked at me and go, Derek, what are you, the counter indicator? And that's why I don't like picking fights, man. But yeah, Rodriguez was having his way with him that round finally.
Yeah, I mean, what's your takeaway from Volkanovski having, won this fight?
Well, so let me say this. Look, when you go to Volk versus Islam, you think, okay, on paper, there's no way Volk can do this because Islam is just a devastating grappling machine. He's going to do this, he can do that. And then Volk basically took him to what, should have been a split decision. Some guys thought Volk won that fight. All the friends I was with last night thought Volk did win that fight. I didn't see it. So, but, then you go to Rodriguez. I'll be honest with you. Rodriguez's abilities are exactly what I would pick to beat Volkanovski. Short guy, been head kick knocked out before, can't deal with that Taekwondo kicks that are some of the best I've ever seen in MMA. And then Volkanovski just finds a way to win. I think it shows what kind of level Volkanovski's on. And it's not something you can put on paper. It's not reach. It's not, some factor that's tangible or qualitative. It's intangible. It's heart. It's guts. It's the work he puts in. The guy's just a savage, man.
I saw Yair on the Instagram. It kind of looked dejected. He was doing a live, but I think he was talking in Spanish. But I feel like he's close. He just gotta keep at it. His offense is, one of a kind. He's just got to shore up his wrestling if he can. Stay on his feet a lot longer. And I feel like he's right there, though.
Listen, man, I honestly, he is representative of like pure Taekwondo and MMA. And what a representative he is, man. I've never seen anyone do kicks like that. Like when I was at my peak training with those guys, like my kicks were pretty good. Yair is eons above that. And to watch him do it in the UFC against those guys is unbelievable, man. I love watching him fight. I
Yeah.
agree with you wholeheartedly, but I will say this too. So, Todd, it's not necessarily always about learning. There's a give and take. Like if you're going to do those kicks like that, and I'm not just talking spin, I'm talking his round kicks and the way he snaps them, you're going to lose some part of the wrestling and you're going to lose some part of the boxing too. So it's getting to know how you can do that perfectly. And it's really hard to mix. And let me say this too, even though he's a featherweight, those kicks take a lot of energy, man. So fighting like that can be very tough. We saw Abus against Strickland recently, and he fought similarly for an 85er, nowhere near the skill of Jair, but it was clear he was a traditional martial artist. Strickland looked like he was going to get knocked out first round. Next round, Strickland knocks him out because he had nothing left in the tank. And so for Yair, I think he's got to mix in more of that other stuff and not always do those flashy kicks because it's real hard to always be on those flashy kicks and be consistent with the wrestling or the boxing too.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at someone like him and try to figure out, because like you're saying, he could still do some of his kicks, just like body kicks, low kicks, and not try to do a lot more of the high risk or high amplitude type things. But he's right there, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Todd, he's a killer, man.
Yeah, it's after you saw him lose to Max, you see him lose this fight. He probably feels like he's not right there, but he is, I think.
I think it's what you're saying, man. He's got to pull back from all those fancy kicks, use them, lower, not necessarily to the head, and then improve those other areas. And maybe then he's unstoppable because that stuff takes a lot of energy. It looks really flashy, but it doesn't always give. It's not always the juice is not worth the squeeze, right? You make that big head kick, but it's more like a slap to the face because his kicks are not Thai like. They're Taekwondo like. They land with the instep in the face. So it's like slapping a guy rather than really, hitting him with a bat.
Now, I know you wanted to talk about Spence Crawford and kind of that they're running on the same night as UFC in Utah. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, man. I mean, for me, my soul is divided, Todd. Look, I desperately want to see Pereira versus Blagojevich, right? I obviously want to see Poirier versus Gaethje too. I saw the first one in Latuda, Texas, in prison, and I remember I was running around doing MMA moves on everybody. I was so excited to watch that fight. It was absolutely incredible. So I want to watch 291, especially because it's in my hometown right now. Um, but the reality is that's just one more UFC card, right? On the other hand, Spence Crawford, that's like Tommy Hearns versus Sugar Ray Leonard, man. You know what I mean? But I'm torn because boxing is not as exciting as MMA, and I don't know what to do.
Yeah, it's got to be kind of, I don't want to say difficult for Dana White because, they're used to putting on shows every weekend. Every now and then something amazing is they're up against as they are at this point. But you got to wonder how he feels about that. And, he's trying to put on this good pay-per-view, and this one of a kind of a fight that doesn't come around very often is going to happen now.
Yeah, so when I was kickboxing still, Todd, I remember there were about three promoters. There was Dan Rodarty, Lorenzo Rodriguez, and a Thai guy named Vut, who had like quasi Thai boxing, no elbows in those days with California State, but they would accidentally sometimes put a card on a big pay-per-view night. Now there was no UFC then; it was all boxing, right? But you're still asking people to pay you money to come see a live event. Well, if you put that up against Oscar De La Hoya, you're going to lose, right? It's all in LA. And, I think what's happened with combat sports, we're so lucky that there's so many cards. I don't think they're trying to chop each other off. I mean, inner boxing does that all the time. We watch Aram give us free pay-per-view, free boxing fights that are world class on pay-per-view UFC nights. And a lot of times Aram gets me. I'm like, okay, I'll watch the free boxing on ESPN. But I think what it is, because Spence Crawford had been trying to make this fight card for so long, it's just luck of the draw. It happens to be on a UFC night, and it is what it is. I don't think anybody's trying to big dick anyone else. Sometimes, look, we got so many great fights now. It's just there's not enough weekends in the year.
Yeah. Now, Jaron Ennis, he ran his record up to like 31-0 last night as well. Maybe talk about Ennis.
Yeah, well, look, and this is what they call the heir apparent, right? Like people have been saying that for a long time. Crawford and Spence, they're both scared of Boots. And so yeah, I've seen his couple of his fights on YouTube. He looks absolutely like a killer. But this is how you promote boxing, right? That's how they promoted Mike Tyson. They're promoting you to get to that position. I want to focus right now. I got to see who wins Spence Crawford before we start talking about Boots and what he's going to do. I know that Spence, this may be his last fight at welter. He may be off to junior middleweight after this, especially that the junior middleweight unified champ is fighting Canelo. So it's all going to be very interesting, man. Boots is the heir apparent, but like Dana White said, there's always a contender. I remember people were scared, like there was no one left at flyweight, and Dana goes, "Don't worry, there's always somebody," and there always is. There's always somebody that wants that title. So yeah, Boots is just the latest and greatest of that. I'm sure he's a stud, but not his turn yet.
Now, do you have any other fights that you're kind of looking forward to?
Well, I mean, I'm happy they put together Stipe versus John Jones. I don't know how I feel about it, right? Like, because I was the one who called John Jones to lose against Cyril Gahn. Massive egg on my face. I don't know how I'd feel with John Jones submitting Stipe, who they're calling the greatest heavyweight of all time. I mean, then John Jones would go down as the best ever. I'm assuming it's. I've got mixed emotions on that fight, Todd.
Yeah, the thing about that one, and I want to look at this. So we got Stipe. He's 40 now. His last fight was against Cormier, and that was in 2020. So I'm sorry, he had a fight in 2021. The Ngannou fight that he lost, the one where he got knocked out. But he hasn't been active, and now he's 40. It's not like Jones is fighting Stipe Miocic's prime. You know what I mean? So that has me a little. I mean, I want to watch the fight, but if you're picking, it's like you don't know who you're going to get with Stipe now. No one knows.
No, I mean, listen, man. So how do I say this? My book is all about how fighting is all matching. Mike Tyson was a media creation, right? And I'm not trying to badmouth Jones. He's an excellent fighter, but at the end of the day, everything is matching, right? Like, if he beats Stipe, does that make him the greatest fighter of all time? I can't put him there. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's too many X factors in there. Like, Stipe's 40. Um, I would have liked to see John Jones fight some monsters like Ngannou or Brock Lesnar or something like that. But unfortunately, we're not going to see that. Jones has already talked about. I wouldn't be surprised if he rode off in the sunset, because one thing he knows is everybody eventually falls, and especially when you're in the land of the giants, somebody's going to get you.
No, maybe you could talk a little bit about it. Obviously, they got Jones to fight. Dana's kind of still saying, I don't know if this promoter talk, but he's still saying he thinks McGregor and Chandler could fight by the end of the year, although, he has no indication of that. And he even admits that Connor's still not in the USADA pool. So maybe talk about the whole Connor Chandler mess,
So
and
yeah, let me bring up an angle that I don't think anyone's really focusing on. So getting a fight with Connor is obviously, that's the party to the dance. You're going to make millions of dollars, right? And Connor even said some things to Chandler, like, Chandler said, "I'll go to 85 for you," and Connor looks at me and goes, "You'll do what you're told." Basically, like making it very clear, I'm the A side and you're like D side. And then Connor went on the show and he's lost every single fight. Now, so guys with big egos like Connor, that's going to affect him, right? And so what do you do to punish the other side? You go, I don't want to fight you anymore because I was giving you this gift. Now I don't want to, and that could very well be part of what's going on. Now, listen, I already told you, I think Connor does very well against short guys, right? And Chandler fits that bill. So I think they possibly handpicked him, but look, ego controls everything. And if Connor feels slighted by his lack of success, there it is.
That's a good point you made. No one's really talking about that. The fact that he's lost all the fights, that he might just say, like you said, I'll just punish you by not fighting you then.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what when we talk about ego, we're really talking about little kids. Like, all right, well, I'm picking up my toys and I'm going home. That's what it is. And not to mention, remember something else that I'm sure weighs on his mind. There was a kid here in Utah that had his life dream. He was going to be on the show. Guess what? They kicked him off because Connor brought his team and forced his team to be on the show, right? So this poor kid from Utah thinks he's getting this breakout moment. Now Connor showed up with his team, and they're going to make these changes for Connor. So that's got to weigh on Connor's mind too. Look, I brought my guys here, and they can't perform. And by the way, I want to talk about something pretty interesting, and this goes into the fight gyms and everything else. Remember Artem Lebov when Connor brought him to his show? The first time I think Connor was on the show, Lebov fought in that sort of mock. I don't want to say mock. It's like a form of a traditional martial artist point fighting stance, like one hand up, the other one real low by the waist, like not guarding your chin at all. And he fought exactly like Connor because that's what Connor was doing at that time. But he had zero success with it. And most of Connor's stablemates had zero success. Sometimes it really helps you being a big fish in a little pond, meaning like you're so used to beating people up. And MMA is 90% mental anyway. It's better than being in a gym of dragon slayers where one person wins one day and the other person wins the other. By the way, Todd, that's why the guys in the scrap pack avoided me. They didn't want days where this fat old man beat them up. Period. And I get that. I mean, I understand that theory, and it holds true to a certain extent. I didn't like it, but yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, that's a good point. He's always stayed there. He's never looked to expand his horizons when it comes to training. Yeah, that's a great point.
yeah. I mean, look, I know that I've heard that he goes into jujitsu gyms and asks for the best guys. But Connor's style, I mean, it's not that he doesn't do a great job of fighting off his back. He does. But his style really isn't a jujitsu style. Like he wants to stand with you. And he's got a good enough jujitsu game to get up if he needs to. And that's really where he is. So, what he does for rolling with people and what he does with striking is completely different.
Now, I'll ask you one more thing about this McGregor thing. It appears that nobody's really watching the show. From a rating standpoint, it's terrible. What do you think? Has Connor lost the allure? Or?
Well, first of all, I don't think the Chandler fight is very compelling to me. Like I'm like, yeah, so he's gonna fight Michael Chandler, a guy who's like, lost a couple fights himself. Like it doesn't excite me. And I already feel like they're trying to set Chandler up. So I think maybe people are just sort of apathetic to the fight itself. Like, what does this prove? Like if Connor wins, what does it mean? Does he get a welterweight title shot? I mean, for me, like why even mess around anymore? Why don't you give Connor a welterweight title shot against Leon Edwards, put it in London? You'll have the whole aisles there. It'll make billions of dollars and move on, once he gets knocked out.
Yeah. Maybe I'll ask you about this is kind of right up the alley of Zuckerberg versus Musk. Like I have no desire to watch two guys that I could beat, in jujitsu for sure, and MMA probably. That yeah, I just don't see the allure of it. It's going to be two guys that aren't very good, probably, unless somehow they've gotten great in a year or two. I don't think they're going to fight personally, but if it was, I know they're famous, but it'll probably be terrible to watch.
Yeah, it might, but Todd, MMA is so popular now. If two stars want to slug it out, I'm okay with it. By the way, I heard Elon Musk has got karate and judo, and we know that. We know that Zuckerberg's training up there. Listen, thank God he's not training with the scrap pack. Otherwise, I'd put my money on Musk for sure. But yeah, man, I mean, it's comical. Another NorCal battle. I'd love to see it.
What do you think about Diaz Jake Paul? Apparently, they're struggling to sell tickets.
I I think personally, look, and this comes from my own experience. There was this trainer, a boxing trainer in San Francisco that would go, "Hey, you want to spar with Nate?" I goes, "Yeah," and I'd show up, and he did this to me like 3 times, and then I'd show up, and Nate would be sparring, and like there was no place for me in there. Now, part of it was the trainer was just a fraud, but a bigger part of that was Nate didn't fight bigger guys. Like Nate fought guys his own size. We know how important weight is. Jake Paul might not look where he punches, but Jake Paul also is a big dude. So and Nate has looked really old lately. And by the way, I'm not the kind of guy who does that to people. Why? Because when I was 45, I was beating up Joey Beltran. So I'm all about like giving guys chances when they're older. And Nate's significantly younger than me. I think he's 39 or something. But the fact is he's looked slow in his last few fights. And it scares me to think of what Jake can do to him. Now, listen, man, I've heard that, and I used to hear it back then that the Diaz brothers spar with Andre Ward. I got news for you. I don't buy it. I mean, I'm sure they're in the ring with them moving, right? But the idea that Andre Ward gives them his best and that they're able to stand with him and they're that good is just ludicrous. And by the way, I want to make note of something else. You've heard, I'm sure, that boxer, I think he's a champion, say like, I sparred with Nate, he stunk. And then Nate's like stablemate's like, oh, that guy's a liar. He got beat up. It reeks of all the stuff going on with me in the scrap back. It's like the same drama. It's like, oh, really? So look, I don't like that fight for Nate, but I do like it for his pocketbook. So, hey, take it, make your millions, but I don't expect Nate to win that fight.
Maybe if he got in the later rounds, then he could, you know, start to come on them. Perhaps I wasn't impressed with Jake Paul fighting Tommy Fury. I thought all he did was grab him for about 90% of the fight, and when he wasn't grabbing him, it was pretty clear that Fury was better than him. So it's hard to think who's going to win the fight.
No, and I agree with everything you've just said,
Mm-hmm.
Todd. And maybe Nate does do what you said, like take him into deep waters and drown him. Here's my bigger concern on that. It's that Jake's a big dude. Nate's not used to sparring guys that big. Let's be real. Nate's real fighting weight was 55. I think he fought 55 against Ferguson, didn't he? Or did they fight 70?
I don't know, but they neither one of them looked all that good.
Oh, it's horrible. They look
Right.
so slow and
I was
old.
being nice. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and Ferguson's got another fight with Bobby Green. Oh,
Yeah. He better be a lot better or Green's gonna hurt him.
Green's gonna knock him out.
Yeah.
There's no. I mean, look, I was a huge fan of Tony. I thought that Habib avoided him, but the Tony incarnation now is over. He's shot.
Yeah. It's sad. For all fighters. I feel bad when any fighter. I mean, I wonder why they're giving it to him. Maybe they're gonna say we want to see if you are shot. We think you are. We'll go ahead and give you Bobby Green and just to be sure. you know.
Okay. Well, I mean, look, Dana's fair about that. He says like with Chuck Liddell is like, I'm not your dad. You do what you want. Like everybody's got a right to make a living, and I get that. But we also have the right to call it how we see it.
No, I mean if Bobby Green does them bad, I think the UFC will say you're done.
They should cut him.
Yeah. I think the UFC will get rid of Ferguson at that
I
point.
think the reason they didn't cut him with Nate is because, that card went so haywire that he was willing to step up and do their bidding. Dana's always got another payday for you if you're a good boy.
Yeah, I mean that's true also. Yeah, but they didn't give him a great opponent for the payday. If you're going to give him one more, maybe you could give him one that he could actually maybe have a chance of winning, like Lawler. Lawler, if you beat somebody that quickly, why retire?
Oh, excuse me, Todd, one sec.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Sorry, buddy. Had my
Yeah,
dog outside and she
yeah.
went after something.
But yeah, I mean Lawler, if you can win a fight that quickly against a guy who's not bad, Nico Price, it's almost like why are you retiring? But it's not like he
Well,
looked like garbage.
and here's the thing about Lawler. We've talked about this long and hard. He was this killer right in the beginning, got taken out by circumstance, Diaz and whatnot, was in Strikeforce, losing fights at 205 over and over again. And then comes back and becomes welterweight champ of the world. You wonder, does he have another run like that in him? Or is he just tired, man? He's been training since high school wrestling.
Yeah. He actually revived his career in Hawaii. I mean, I don't know if you saw that where I put that video on there, but he had came and fought in TJ shows a handful of times, and he fought in Elite XC, and that's kind of where he revived his career. He's fighting at 185, and he had some big knockouts. He beat Nico Vitali twice by knockout. He beat Frank Trigg by knockout. I think he lost to Mayhem Miller, but yeah, that's kind of yeah, he got taken down and beat by Mayhem Miller, but he had some good knockouts.
We've had some funny conversations, and I think drugs are the answer. But remember, we were on with that guy, and we said, like, look, Jake Shields beats Dan Henderson and then nearly loses to Mayhem Miller, right? I mean, I remember I was really excited for Mayhem Miller to come to the UFC, and he just looked horrible when he got there. And the only explanation I have for that, Todd, is drugs, right? Like the guy looks like a different person. And I'm talking about all those guys together, whether it's Mayhem Miller, Robbie, Jake. So yeah, I mean it's funny, and A beating B, B beating C doesn't mean that A necessarily beats C.
Yeah. Well, Derek, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's always great to talk, fights with you. And UFC 290 was so good. I wanted to talk to somebody about it. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Always, man. I was happy to talk about it too. It was a great event.
Yeah. Well, for everyone that's watching the show, check out Derek. Derek, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, if you like my combat sports, TikTok's at Derek Galanis. If you like crime and the mafia, it's at Derek Meyer Galanis. If you like both, you follow me on Instagram at Derek Galanis. I also have 2 books, Greed and Fear of the Galanis Crime Family and Warrior of the Light. You can find them on Amazon.
All right, Derek, it was great talking to you. And until next time, everyone that watched these shows supports it, appreciate it. And everybody take care.